The candles had barely been lit when Elena felt it, a strange pull in her chest, like a string tied to her ribs and pulled tight from across the room. She was standing near the back wall of the great hall, holding a tray of drinks she was not even supposed to be carrying, when Cale Ashford turned his head and looked directly at her. Not at the crowd, not at his future bride, at her. The hall was full of people. Torches burned along the stone walls, and the smell of roasted meat and wildflowers filled the air. This was the betrothal feast, the night that would bind the Ashford pact to the Voss family forever. Marissa, her older sister, stood at the center of it all, wearing a deep green dress that made her look like she belonged on a throne. She was laughing at something one of the elders said, her hand resting lightly on Cale's arm, completely unaware that his eyes had drifted away from her. Elena looked down at the tray in her hands. Her fingers had gone cold. She told herself it was nothing, that she was imagining things, that a man like Cale Ashford, the strongest alpha in the Northern Territories, had no reason to look twice at the younger, quieter sister of his bride. She set the tray down on a side table and pressed her palm against her chest, trying to steady her own heartbeat. But when she looked up again, he was still watching her. Cale felt something shift inside him the moment Elena walked past the fire. His wolf, usually calm and controlled, especially in front of guests, suddenly went still and alert, like a hunter, catching a scent it had waited a lifetime to find. He tried to look away. He tried to focus on Marissa's voice beside him, on the words of congratulations from the elders, on anything except the quiet young woman standing near the wall with dark hair pulled back and eyes that refused to meet his for more than a second. It did not work. His wolf pushed against his control, a pressure behind his eyes that felt like heat, like static before a storm. He gripped the edge of the table until his knuckles turned pale and forced himself to breathe. This was his engagement feast. This was the night his father had spent months preparing, the alliance that would bring peace between two territories that had fought for decades before the truce. He could not let a strange, sudden feeling ruin any of it. "Cale?" Marissa's voice cut through the noise. "You look pale. Are you unwell?" He blinked and turned to her, forcing a smile onto his face. "I'm fine. Just tired. It has been a long week." She studied him for a moment, her sharp eyes narrowing slightly, but she let it go and turned back to the elder beside her, continuing the conversation about the wedding date. Cale exhaled slowly and allowed himself one more glance toward the back wall. Elena was gone. She had slipped out through a side door into the cool night air, her heart still racing. The gardens behind the great hall were quiet, lit only by lanterns, hanging from the low branches of old trees. She walked until the noise from the feast faded into a soft hum behind her, and then she stopped, pressing her back against the trunk of a wide oak tree, trying to make sense of what had just happened. She had felt eyes on her before. She was used to being overlooked at gatherings like this one. Marissa was the beautiful one, the confident one, the one who commanded a room without even trying. Elena had spent her whole life standing a few steps behind her sister, and she had made peace with that a long time ago. But tonight was different. Tonight, when Cale looked at her, it did not feel like ordinary attention. It felt like recognition, like something inside her had answered something inside him, without either of them choosing it. She shook her head, trying to clear the thought from her mind. It was ridiculous. Cale Ashford was engaged to her sister. In 3 months, he would be her brother by marriage. Whatever strange feeling had passed between them in that hall, it meant nothing, and she intended to bury it as deep as she could. "There you are." Marissa's voice came from behind her, light and teasing. "I thought you had run off on me." Elena turned, forcing a smile onto her face. "I just needed some air. It's warm in there." Marissa walked closer, her green dress catching the lantern light. "You could have told me you were leaving. I was going to introduce you to Cale properly. You barely said 2 words to him earlier." "I will meet him soon enough," Elena said. "There's no rush. You have months before the wedding." Marissa's smile softened, and for a moment, the confident mask she wore in front of everyone else slipped just slightly, revealing something more uncertain underneath. "I'm glad you're here, Elena. I know things have not always been easy between us, but I want you standing beside me when I marry him. You're my sister. That matters more than anything." Elena felt a pang of guilt so sharp it nearly took her breath away. She reached out and squeezed her sister's hand. "Of course I'll be there. Nothing could keep me away." She meant it. Whatever strange feeling had happened inside that hall, she was determined not to let it touch her sister's happiness. She would smile through every wedding preparation, every fitting, every ceremony, and she would never speak a word of what she had felt when Cale Ashford looked at her like she was the only person in the room. The two sisters walked back toward the hall together, arm in arm, and if anyone had looked closely, they might have noticed Elena's smile did not quite reach her eyes. Inside, Cale was watching the door. He told himself he was simply making sure his guests were comfortable, that his attention kept drifting toward the entrance, for reasons that had nothing to do with a particular young woman with dark hair and quiet eyes. But when Elena walked back in beside her sister, something in his chest loosened, like a held breath finally released, and he hated how relieved he felt. His best friend and second in command, a broad-shouldered man named Owen, appeared at his side with 2 cups of mead. "You've been staring at the door for 10 minutes, Owen said quietly, handing him a cup. "Everything all right?" "Everything is fine," Cale said, taking the cup without really tasting it. Owen followed his gaze across the room, and his eyebrows lifted slightly when he saw where it landed. "The younger sister?" Cale's jaw tightened. "I don't know what you mean." "Cale, I've known you since we were pups. I know what it looks like when your wolf is restless." Owen's voice dropped even lower, careful not to be overheard. "You've barely looked at Marissa all evening. But every time that girl walks into a room, you go quiet in a way I've never seen before." "It's nothing," Cale said firmly, though the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. "I'm marrying Marissa in 3 months. This alliance matters more than any passing feeling." Owen studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly, though the doubt never quite left his expression. "If you say so." The feast continued late into the night, filled with music, laughter, and toasts to the future of 2 territories bound together in peace. Cale played his part perfectly, standing beside Marissa, accepting congratulations, smiling when he was expected to smile. But every so often, his eyes would drift toward the back of the hall, searching for a face he knew he should not be looking for. Elena spent the rest of the evening keeping her distance, staying close to the older women of the pack, helping serve food, doing anything she could to keep herself busy and out of Cale's line of sight. It worked, mostly. But there were moments, brief and fleeting, when she felt his gaze on her from across the room, and each time, her skin prickled with a warmth she could not explain and did not want. By the time the feast ended, and the guests began to leave, Elena felt exhausted, in a way that had nothing to do with the late hour. She helped clear the tables alongside a few of the younger pack members, grateful for the mindless work that kept her hands busy and her thoughts occupied. "You're not staying for the toasts?" one of the younger women asked her, noticing Elena slipping toward the side door. "I have an early start tomorrow," Elena said, which was true enough. Her family had agreed to help coordinate several of the wedding preparations over the coming months, and she was expected at the Ashford estate first thing in the morning to begin planning with the household staff. "Tell Marissa I said goodnight." She stepped out into the cool night air, grateful to finally be alone. The stars stretched wide and bright above the tree line, and for a moment, she simply stood there, breathing in the quiet, trying to steady the strange unease that had settled in her chest since the moment Cale Ashford had looked at her. She told herself it would pass. Whatever had happened tonight was a mistake, a trick of candlelight and nerves, nothing more. In the morning, she would see Cale again in the daylight, surrounded by wedding plans and household staff, and the ordinary business of preparing for a marriage that had nothing to do with her, and this strange feeling would fade like mist under the sun. She walked home through the quiet paths that connected the packlands, her mind circling the same thoughts over and over. By the time she reached her family's house, the windows were dark except for a single candle left burning in the front room for her. She let herself in quietly, careful not to wake her parents, and made her way up to her bedroom. She sat on the edge of her bed for a long time before finally lying down, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of the wind outside her window. Somewhere across the territory, in the Ashford estate, she wondered if Cale was lying awake too, staring at his own ceiling, wrestling with the same unwanted feeling. She did not know that he was. Cale stood at the window of his private chamber long after the last guest had gone, watching the moon climb higher into the sky. His wolf paced restlessly beneath his skin, agitated in a way it had never been before, not even in the tense years before the truce. not even during the worst confrontations with rival packs. It wanted something. It wanted someone. And Cale knew exactly who, even though he refused to say her name out loud, even to himself. He thought of Marissa, of the promise he had made to her, and to both their families, of the peace this marriage was meant to secure between two territories that had bled each other for years before finding common ground. He thought of his father, gone now for 3 winters, who had spent the final years of his life working toward this exact alliance. He could not throw all of that away because of a strange feeling that struck him once at a crowded feast. He told himself it was nothing. He told himself that wolves sometimes felt pulls toward people that meant nothing at all, distractions born of stress and pressure, and the weight of leadership resting on his shoulders. He told himself all of this, and he almost believed it, until he closed his eyes and saw her face again, quiet and startled, looking at him from across a room full of people who did not matter at all in that moment. He did not sleep well that night, neither did she. The following morning, Elena arrived at the Ashford estate exactly on time, dressed in a simple gray dress, her dark hair braided back neatly, carrying a leather folder full of notes about flowers, seating arrangements, and catering details that her sister had asked her to review. She told herself this would be easy. She would meet with the household staff, discuss logistics, and leave, before Cale even knew she had been there. She should have known it would not be that simple. She was standing in the estate's front courtyard, speaking with an older woman named Grace who managed the household staff, when she heard footsteps approaching from behind. She did not need to turn around to know who it was. Her whole body seemed to recognize him before her eyes ever confirmed it, a warmth spreading through her chest that she hated herself for feeling. "Miss Voss," Cale said, his voice steady, though there was something careful in the way he said her name. "I did not expect to see you here this morning." Elena turned to face him, forcing her expression into something calm and polite. "Marissa asked me to help coordinate a few of the preparations. I hope that is all right." "Of course," he said. "Anything you need, Grace will help you find." For a moment, neither of them said anything else. Grace glanced between them, sensing the strange tension in the air but saying nothing, simply waiting for one of them to continue. "I should let you get back to your work," Cale finally said, though he made no move to leave. "Yes," Elena said. "Of course." Still, he lingered a moment longer than necessary, before finally turning and walking back toward the main house, and Elena let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Grace watched her carefully, her sharp eyes missing nothing, though she said nothing about what she had seen. "Shall we go over the flower arrangements?" Grace asked gently. Elena nodded, grateful for the distraction, and the two women walked together toward the garden, leaving the strange, charged air of the courtyard behind them. But even as she buried herself in the details of ribbon colors and table settings, Elena could not shake the feeling that something had shifted between her and Cale in that single brief exchange, something neither of them had spoken aloud, but both of them had clearly felt. Over the following days, the wedding preparations moved forward at a steady pace, and Elena found herself at the Ashford estate more often than she had expected. Every visit brought a new task, a new detail to review, and every visit brought at least one moment, however brief, where she crossed paths with Cale. Sometimes it was nothing more than a passing nod in a hallway. Other times, it was a longer exchange, a few words about the wedding plans that always seemed to carry more weight than the words themselves suggested. Elena told herself she was imagining the tension between them, that it existed only in her own mind, born from nerves and exhaustion, and the strange feeling from the betrothal feast that she still had not fully explained away. But there were moments, quiet and unguarded, when she caught Cale watching her from across a room, and the look on his face made it clear that whatever she was feeling, she was not feeling it alone. She began to dread those moments, almost as much as she found herself waiting for them, and that contradiction frightened her more than anything else. She loved her sister. She wanted nothing more than for Marissa's wedding to be everything she had ever dreamed of, and yet, every time Cale's eyes found hers across a crowded room, some small, quiet part of her wondered what it would mean if things had been different, if she had met him first, if fate had chosen a different path for the three of them. She pushed the thought away every time it surfaced, burying it beneath layers of duty and guilt, telling herself that whatever this strange pull between them was, it would fade with time. Weddings were stressful. Emotions ran high. She was simply caught up in the excitement and pressure of the preparations, nothing more. But deep down, in a place she refused to look too closely at, she knew that was not entirely true. And though neither of them said it aloud, she suspected that Cale knew it too. The full moon was still 3 weeks away, and neither of them yet understood what that night would mean for all of them. The days grew shorter, and the wedding preparations grew busier, filling every corner of Elena's schedule, until she barely had time to think about anything else. That should have made things easier. Instead, it seemed to make the strange pull toward Cale even harder to ignore, because now they were forced into each other's company almost daily, working side by side on details that Marissa was often too busy with pack business to attend to herself. Marissa had taken on more responsibility since the engagement was announced. As the future mate of an alpha, she was expected to begin learning the workings of pack governance, sitting in on council meetings, reviewing trade agreements with neighboring territories, and preparing herself for a role that would soon define the rest of her life. It left little time for wedding details, so those details fell to Elena, who found herself spending long afternoons at the Ashford estate, walking through gardens with Grace, reviewing menus with the kitchen staff, and inevitably, crossing paths with Cale, more often than either of them probably should have. One afternoon, she found herself alone with him in the estate's library, a quiet room lined with tall shelves and a large window that let in soft afternoon light. She had come to retrieve a book of seating charts that Grace had left there the day before, expecting the room to be empty. Instead, she found Cale sitting at the long table near the window, a stack of papers in front of him, his expression tired in a way she had not seen before. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, already turning to leave. "I did not mean to interrupt." "You're not interrupting," he said, setting down his pen. "Please, stay if you need something." She hesitated at the doorway, torn between the polite instinct to leave and the pull that kept her feet rooted to the floor. Finally, she stepped inside, moving toward the shelf where Grace had said the seating chart book would be. "I just need to find something Grace left here." "The blue folder, near the window," Cale said, without looking up. "I saw it there this morning." Elena crossed the room and found the folder exactly where he said it would be. She picked it up, holding it against her chest, and turned to leave, but something made her pause. "You look tired," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Cale looked up at her, surprised by the observation. For a moment, something vulnerable crossed his face, a crack in the composed leadership he always presented to the world. "Council meetings have been difficult lately. There are tensions along our eastern border that need careful handling." "I'm sorry to hear that," Elena said, and she meant it. Despite everything, despite the strange and unwanted feelings that stirred in her chest whenever he was near, she found that she genuinely cared about his well-being, and that realization unsettled her almost as much as the feelings themselves. "It will pass," he said, though his voice carried little confidence. "It usually does." They stood there for a moment, the silence between them, heavy with things neither of them was willing to say. Elena's grip tightened on the folder in her arms, and she forced herself to take a step back toward the door. "I should let you get back to your work." "Elena," he said, and the sound of her name in his voice made her freeze in place. It was the first time he had used it, instead of the formal address he usually offered her. "Thank you for everything you have been doing to help with the preparations. I know it has not been easy, balancing all of this." "It's for my sister," she said quietly, though the words felt strange as she said them, as if she needed to remind herself as much as him. "I would do anything for her happiness." Something flickered across his face at those words, something she could not quite read, and then he nodded and looked back down at his papers. "Of course." She left the library quickly after that, her heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with the stack of folders in her arms. She told herself the exchange had meant nothing, that he had simply been polite, that the strange tension she felt was born entirely from her own imagination. But as the days passed, she found it harder and harder to convince herself of that. Cale, for his part, was fighting a battle within himself that grew more difficult by the day. His wolf had never behaved this way before, restless and dissatisfied no matter how much he tried to reason with it. It was worst whenever he was near Marissa, a strange unease settling over him that he could not explain, as if some instinct deep within him recognized that something was wrong, even though his mind insisted there was nothing wrong at all. He had known Marissa for years before their engagement was arranged. She was intelligent, capable, and strong-willed, everything a future alpha's mate should be. He respected her. He even cared for her, in the way that came naturally after months spent working closely together on the responsibilities of pack leadership. But respect and care were not the same as the overwhelming, undeniable pull he felt whenever Elena walked into a room, and he was beginning to fear that no amount of willpower would be enough to make that feeling disappear. He confided in Owen one evening, the two of them sitting near the fire in Cale's private study, long after the household had gone quiet for the night. Owen listened patiently as Cale explained everything, the restlessness of his wolf, the strange calm that settled over him whenever Elena was near, the guilt that ate at him every time he caught himself watching her instead of his intended bride. "You know what this sounds like," Owen said carefully, once Cale had finished. "Don't say it," Cale warned. "I have to say it, because you're too stubborn to say it yourself." Owen leaned forward, his expression serious. "It sounds like a fated bond, Cale. I've seen it happen before, though it's rare." The wolf recognizes something the mind refuses to accept. Cale shook his head firmly. "That's not possible. I chose Marissa. My father arranged this match before he passed. The alliance depends on it." "Fate doesn't care about alliances," Owen said quietly. "It doesn't care about arrangements or promises or anything else. If your wolf has truly recognized her as your mate, it will not stop until it gets what it wants. You know this as well as I do." Cale stood abruptly, pacing toward the window, staring out at the dark tree line beyond the estate grounds. "I cannot do this to Marissa. I cannot humiliate her, break a promise made to her family, throw away years of careful diplomacy, because of some feeling I cannot even fully explain." "And if the feeling doesn't go away?" Owen asked. "What then?" Cale did not have an answer for that. He stood at the window for a long time after Owen left, watching the moon rise slowly over the trees, growing fuller with each passing night, counting down toward the gathering that would bring the entire pack together beneath its light. He told himself he had time, that whatever this feeling was, he could control it, manage it, keep it buried, until it eventually faded on its own. He did not yet understand that faded bonds did not fade, they only grew stronger. Elena, meanwhile, was fighting her own battle at home, though she had no one to confide in the way Cale had confided in Owen. She could not tell her parents what she was feeling, not when they were so proud of the alliance Marissa's marriage would secure. She certainly could not tell Marissa, not without destroying the trust between them completely. So she carried the weight alone, burying it deeper each day, throwing herself into wedding preparations as a way of proving to herself that her loyalty to her sister outweighed whatever strange pull she felt toward Cale. It became harder to maintain that resolve as the days passed. She began noticing small things she had no business noticing, the way Cale's expression softened slightly whenever she entered a room, the way his voice changed subtly when he spoke to her compared to when he spoke to others, the way he seemed to find reasons to be near wherever the wedding preparations took her. She told herself these were coincidences, that she was reading too much into ordinary interactions, but the excuses grew thinner with each passing encounter. One evening, Marissa invited Elena to stay for dinner at the Ashford estate, wanting to go over the final guest list together before the invitations were sent out. Cale joined them partway through the meal, having finished a late council session, and the three of them sat together at the long dining table, the candlelight flickering between them. Marissa talked animatedly about the guest list, discussing which neighboring pack leaders needed to be seated near each other, and which ones needed to be kept apart due to old rivalries. Elena listened and offered suggestions where she could, grateful for the structure of the conversation, something concrete to focus on instead of the growing unease in her chest. But every so often, she caught Cale's eyes on her from across the table, and each time, a warmth spread through her that she desperately wished she could ignore. Marissa, absorbed in her planning, did not seem to notice the silent exchanges happening right in front of her, and Elena hated herself a little more each time it happened. "You've been quiet tonight," Marissa said at one point, turning to Cale. "Is everything all right?" "Just tired," Cale said, the same excuse he had been using for weeks now. "The council meetings have been demanding lately." Marissa reached over and squeezed his hand affectionately, and Elena forced herself to look away, focusing instead on the food in front of her, though her appetite had disappeared entirely. She excused herself shortly after dinner, claiming exhaustion, and Marissa did not press the matter, too absorbed in her wedding planning to notice her sister's discomfort. As Elena walked home that night, the full moon hung low and bright in the sky, casting silver light across the path ahead of her. It was nearly full now, only a few nights away from reaching its peak, and something about its glow made her uneasy, in a way she could not quite explain. She quickened her pace, eager to reach the safety of her own home, away from the strange, charged atmosphere of the Ashford estate. She did not know that somewhere behind her, Cale stood at his window, watching her figure disappear down the moonlit path, his wolf pacing restlessly beneath his skin, counting down the days until the full moon gathering that would change everything for all three of them. The pull between them had grown too strong to ignore, though both of them continued trying anyway, neither one ready to face what it truly meant, neither one prepared for the moment when instinct would finally overpower every careful promise they had tried so hard to keep. The full moon gathering was one of the most important nights on the pack calendar, a night when every member of the Ashford territory came together in the clearing beyond the estate to honor the moon that gave them their strength. Bonfires were lit around the edges of the clearing, and the pack gathered in a wide circle, waiting for the moment when the moon reached its highest point in the sky. Elena had attended these gatherings before, though never with the weight of anticipation that pressed on her chest tonight. She stood near her parents, dressed in a simple dark blue dress, watching as pack members greeted one another, sharing food and quiet conversation while they waited for the ceremony to begin. Marissa stood near the front of the gathering, close to where Cale would eventually take his place as alpha, her golden hair catching the firelight as she laughed with a group of pack elders. Elena tried to focus on the warmth of the fires, the comforting presence of her parents beside her, anything except the growing unease that had settled over her the moment the sun began to set. She told herself it was simply the anticipation of the ceremony, the natural tension that came with such an important night. But deep down, some instinct she could not name told her that tonight would be different from every gathering that had come before it. Cale arrived just as the moon began its final climb toward its peak, dressed in dark clothing that marked him clearly as the alpha of the gathering. The crowd quieted as he moved toward the center of the clearing, and Elena watched him carefully from her place near the edge of the circle, her heart beating faster with each step he took. He looked different tonight, she thought. There was a tension in his shoulders, a tightness around his eyes that had not been there during their earlier meetings at the estate. She wondered if the pressure of leadership was weighing on him more heavily than usual, or if something else entirely was troubling him. She did not have to wonder for long. The ceremony began as it always did, with the pack elders offering words of gratitude to the moon, thanking it for the strength and unity it gave their people. Cale stood at the center, his eyes closed, and Elena watched as his shoulders rose and fell with each measured breath, as if he were fighting to maintain control over something building inside him. The moon reached its peak, bathing the entire clearing in silver light, and something shifted in the air, a charge that Elena felt in her very bones. Around her, she noticed other pack members shifting uncomfortably, their wolves responding to the powerful energy of the full moon, in ways that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Cale's eyes opened, and Elena felt her breath catch in her throat as his gaze moved across the crowd, searching, until it landed directly on her. This time, there was no subtlety to it, no careful glance quickly hidden. His eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made the entire clearing seem to fade away, leaving only the two of them standing in the silver moonlight. A murmur rippled through the crowd as people began to notice where the alpha's attention had settled. Marissa, standing near the front, turned to follow his gaze, confusion crossing her face, as she realized he was looking toward her sister instead of toward her. "Cale?" Marissa's voice cut through the quiet, uncertain and questioning. But Cale did not seem to hear her. His entire body had gone rigid, and Elena watched in growing alarm as something changed in his expression. A fierce, almost desperate focus, replacing the careful composure he usually maintained. He took a step forward, then another, moving through the crowd toward her, and Elena felt rooted to the spot, unable to move, unable to look away from the intensity building in his eyes. "What is happening?" someone in the crowd whispered, and the question rippled outward, confusion and concern spreading through the gathered pack. Elena's mother grabbed her arm, pulling her slightly closer, sensing that something significant was unfolding, though she did not yet understand what. Elena's own heart pounded so loudly, she was certain everyone around her could hear it. A mixture of fear and something else entirely. Something warm and undeniable that she had spent weeks trying to bury. Cale stopped just a few steps away from her, his breathing heavy, his control visibly slipping with every passing second. "Elena," he said, her name carrying across the suddenly silent clearing, loud enough for everyone present to hear. "Cale, what are you doing?" Marissa's voice rose sharply, panic and confusion evident in every word as she pushed through the crowd toward them. But it was too late to stop what was happening. Cale's control finally broke, and his wolf surged forward with an intensity that could no longer be denied or restrained. In front of the entire gathered pack, in front of Marissa, in front of Elena's own stunned parents, Cale closed the remaining distance between them and pressed his mark against her, the ancient bonding gesture that every wolf present recognized instantly for what it was. A collective gasp swept through the clearing. The silver moonlight seemed to intensify around them for just a moment, as if the moon itself were acknowledging what had just taken place, and Elena felt a warmth spread through her entire body, a sense of rightness so overwhelming it nearly brought her to her knees, even as her mind screamed in horror at what had just happened in front of everyone she knew. "No," Marissa whispered, her voice barely audible, though it carried through the stunned silence of the clearing like a physical blow. "No, this cannot be happening." Cale stepped back, his own expression a mixture of shock and dawning realization, as if some part of him had known this moment was coming, but had never truly believed his control would fail so completely, so publicly, in front of the very woman he was supposed to marry. "I'm sorry," he said, though the words felt hollow and inadequate against the enormity of what had just occurred. "Marissa, I did not mean for this to happen." Marissa stood frozen for a moment, her face pale in the moonlight, before something in her expression hardened into something colder, more controlled. "You marked her," she said, her voice shaking despite her obvious effort to keep it steady. "In front of everyone. You marked my sister." The crowd remained utterly silent, every pack member watching the scene unfold with a mixture of shock, sympathy, and barely concealed curiosity. Elena's parents pushed forward, her mother's face white with distress, her father's expression torn between anger and confusion. "Elena?" her father said, his voice tight. "What is the meaning of this?" "I don't know," Elena said, her voice trembling as she looked down at her wrist, where the mark now glowed faintly beneath her skin, a visible symbol of the bond that had just been forced into existence in front of the entire pack. "Father, I swear, I did not want this. I did not ask for this." "But you felt it," Marissa said quietly, and when Elena looked up, she saw not anger in her sister's eyes, but a devastating hurt that cut far deeper than any accusation could have. "You've felt it for weeks, haven't you? I saw the way he looked at you at the feast. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself my sister would never do something like this to me." "Marissa, please," Elena said, tears filling her eyes. "I never wanted this. I tried so hard to stay away from him, to keep my distance, to protect what you and Cale had together. I would never have chosen this. But you didn't choose it." An older pack elder spoke up from the crowd, her voice carrying a note of solemn authority. "This is a fated bond. It cannot be chosen, and it cannot be undone. The moon itself has decided this, not either of them." Marissa's eyes flashed with anger and grief in equal measure, and she turned to look at Cale, who stood frozen, unable to find any words that could possibly make the situation better. "You were supposed to marry me," she said, her voice breaking. "In 3 months, everyone was going to watch us stand together, and now you've made a fool of me in front of the entire pack." "That was never my intention," Cale said, desperation creeping into his voice. "I fought this, Marissa. I have been fighting this feeling for weeks, trying to convince myself it meant nothing, trying to keep my promise to you and to our families. I never wanted to hurt you." "But you did," Marissa said, and without another word, she turned and pushed through the crowd, disappearing into the darkness beyond the firelight, her retreating figure the last thing anyone saw before the clearing erupted into a chaos of hushed whispers and stunned conversation. Elena moved to follow her sister, but her father's hand closed firmly around her arm, holding her back. "Let her go," he said quietly, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "She needs time. We all need time to understand what has just happened here tonight. Elena looked down at the mark on her wrist again, still glowing faintly, a permanent reminder of a bond she had never asked for and could not undo. She looked up at Cale, who stood a few feet away, his expression a mixture of guilt, confusion, and something else she could not quite name. Something that looked almost like relief, despite the devastation unfolding around them. "What happens now?" she asked quietly, though she was not entirely sure who she was asking, Cale, the elders, or the moon itself. No one had an answer for her, not that night. The pack elders called for the gathering to disperse, promising that a council meeting would be held in the coming days to address the situation properly. Elena's parents led her home in silence, her father's grip firm on her shoulder the entire walk, as if he feared she might do something reckless if left unsupervised. Elena did not sleep at all that night. She lay awake in her bed, staring at the mark on her wrist, feeling the strange, undeniable pull toward Cale that had only grown stronger since the moment he had touched her in front of the entire clearing. She thought of her sister's devastated expression, the hurt in her voice, the years of trust between them that had shattered in a single moment neither of them had chosen or wanted. She thought of everything she had tried to do to prevent this, every distance she had tried to keep, every feeling she had tried to bury, and none of it had mattered in the end. The moon had decided something that neither she nor Cale had any power to change, and now she had to find a way to live with the consequences, no matter how impossible that felt in this moment. Somewhere across the territory, in his own private chamber, Cale sat awake as well, staring at his own marked hand, wrestling with guilt over the pain he had caused Marissa, and a strange, undeniable peace that had settled over his restless wolf for the first time in weeks. He did not know how to reconcile those two feelings, the guilt and the peace existing side by side in his chest, but he knew one thing, with absolute certainty, as the night wore on toward dawn. There was no going back from what had happened in that clearing. The bond had been formed, witnessed by his entire pack, and whatever came next, all three of their lives had been changed forever, by a moment none of them had been able to control. The morning after the gathering brought no relief, only a heavier silence that settled over the Voss household like a thick fog. Elena came downstairs to find her mother sitting at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of untouched tea, her eyes red from a sleepless night of her own. Her father stood near the window, his back straight, his expression unreadable in a way that frightened Elena more than any outburst of anger could have. "Marissa did not come home last night," her mother said quietly, not looking up. "She stayed with a friend near the eastern edge of the territory. She sent word this morning that she needed time before she was ready to see any of us." Elena's stomach twisted painfully. "I need to talk to her. I need her to know that I never wanted any of this." "She knows that," her father said, finally turning from the window. "But knowing something, and accepting it, are not the same thing, Elena. Your sister has spent months preparing for a wedding that no longer exists in the same way. Give her time before you try to explain yourself." The words stung more than Elena expected, though she understood the wisdom behind them. She sat down at the table across from her mother, staring at the mark on her wrist, still faintly visible beneath her sleeve. "What happens now? Is there any way to undo this?" Her mother finally looked up, and the exhaustion in her eyes told Elena everything she needed to know before her mother even spoke. "Fated bonds are extremely rare, Elena, and as far as anyone knows, they have never been broken once they are formed. The council will meet to discuss what this means for the alliance between our families, but the bond itself, the connection between you and Cale, that is beyond anyone's control now." Elena pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill over. "This is going to destroy everything. The alliance, Marissa's happiness, our family, all of it, because of something neither of us chose." "No one is blaming you for something you did not choose," her father said gently, sitting down beside her and placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "But you must understand, Elena, the situation we find ourselves in is complicated. This alliance was never simply about a wedding. It secured peace between two territories that fought bitterly for years before the truce was signed. If that alliance falls apart now, the consequences could reach far beyond this family." Elena nodded slowly, the weight of what her father was saying settling heavily on her shoulders. She had never wanted to be at the center of something so significant, so consequential. She had spent her entire life content to remain in the background, letting Marissa shine in whatever spotlight their family found itself in. And now, through no choice of her own, she had become the center of a crisis that threatened to unravel years of careful diplomacy. A messenger arrived later that morning, summoning both Elena and her parents to a formal council meeting at the Ashford estate, scheduled for the following afternoon. The message was polite but firm, making clear that the matter required serious discussion among both families and the pack elders. Elena spent the rest of the day in a state of quiet dread, unable to focus on anything, replaying the events of the previous night over and over in her mind. She tried once to visit Marissa at the friend's house where she was staying, but the door remained closed when she knocked, and a quiet voice from inside asked her gently to leave, explaining that Marissa was not yet ready to talk. Elena walked home slowly afterward, her chest aching with a grief that felt strangely similar to mourning, though nothing had died, except perhaps the relationship she had always shared with her sister. Cale, meanwhile, faced his own difficult reckoning. Owen found him in his study early that morning, staring blankly at a stack of papers he had made no effort to read. "You look terrible," Owen said, settling into the chair across from him. "I ruined everything," Cale said quietly. "I promised myself I would control this, that I would honor my commitment to Marissa no matter what my wolf demanded, and in the end, I failed completely, in front of the entire pack." "You did not fail," Owen said carefully. "A fated bond is not something any wolf can control indefinitely, Cale. You held out longer than most would have, given the circumstances. But eventually, the pull becomes too strong to resist. This is not a failure of your character. It is simply the nature of what fate has decided for you." "Tell that to Marissa," Cale said bitterly. "Tell that to her family, who trusted me to honor an agreement that took years to negotiate. Tell that to my own council, who will now have to figure out how to salvage an alliance that I may have single-handedly destroyed." Owen leaned forward, his expression serious. "The alliance does not have to fall apart, Cale. There may be other ways to preserve the peace between the territories, even if the marriage itself cannot proceed as originally planned. But you cannot fix any of this by drowning in guilt. You need to think clearly, and you need to prepare for tomorrow's council meeting, because difficult decisions will need to be made, and everyone will be looking to you for leadership." Cale nodded slowly, though the weight in his chest did not lift. He thought of Elena's face in the moonlight, the mixture of fear and something warmer that had crossed her expression when he marked her. He thought of Marissa's devastated eyes, the betrayal evident in every word she had spoken before disappearing into the darkness. Two women, both deserving of respect and consideration, and he had managed to hurt one of them deeply, while binding himself irrevocably to the other, all in a single moment he had never intended to happen. The following afternoon, the council meeting convened in the great hall of the Ashford estate, the same room that had hosted the joyful betrothal feast only weeks earlier. Now, the atmosphere could not have been more different. The pack elders sat along one side of the long table, their expressions grave. Marissa's family sat across from them, tension radiating from every member present. Cale sat at the head of the table, flanked by Owen, while Elena sat beside her parents, feeling smaller and more exposed than she had ever felt in her entire life. Marissa arrived last, entering the hall with her chin held high, though the exhaustion and hurt were still visible beneath her carefully composed expression. She took her seat without looking at either Cale or Elena, focusing her attention instead on the eldest council member, a silver-haired woman named Ruth, who had served as an advisor to the Ashford pack for decades. "We are gathered here today to discuss the events of the full moon gathering," Ruth began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had navigated countless pack crises before. "A fated bond has formed between our Alpha and Elena Voss, a bond that, as many of you know, cannot be undone or ignored. This presents a significant challenge to the alliance our two families worked so carefully to establish." "There is no challenge," Marissa's father said sharply, his frustration evident. "There is a broken promise. My daughter was engaged to be married in 3 months. That engagement has now been shattered in the most public and humiliating way possible." "I understand your anger," Ruth said calmly, "but I must remind everyone present that fated bonds are matters of destiny, not choice. No one in this room, including Cale, had any control over what happened at the gathering. The question before us now is not one of blame, but of how we move forward in a way that preserves the peace between our territories." "And what of my daughter's future?" Marissa's father continued, his voice rising. What of the humiliation she now faces, having been publicly rejected in favor of her own sister? Do you expect her to simply accept this and move on as if nothing happened? No one is asking Marissa to simply accept anything, Cale said, speaking for the first time since the meeting began, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions he clearly felt beneath the surface. I owe her an apology far greater than any words can express, and I intend to do everything within my power to ensure this situation does not damage her standing or her future, regardless of what happens with the alliance. Marissa finally looked at him, her expression unreadable. And what exactly do you propose, Cale? That I simply step aside gracefully while you marry my sister instead, as if I am nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle to be worked around? That is not what I meant, Cale said, though he had no better alternative to offer in that moment. The room fell into tense silence, broken only when Ruth spoke again, her voice measured and careful. There are precedents for situations such as this, though they are exceedingly rare. In some cases, alternative arrangements have been made to preserve alliances, even when a fated bond disrupts the original marriage plans. Perhaps a different member of Marissa's family could take her place in securing the alliance, if she is willing to consider such an arrangement, though I understand this may feel like an inadequate solution given the circumstances. I have no other siblings, Marissa said flatly. There is no substitute available. Then perhaps the alliance itself needs to be restructured, another council member suggested. A treaty based on trade and mutual defense rather than marriage. It would take time to negotiate, but it is not impossible. The discussion continued for hours, various proposals raised and debated, tempers flaring occasionally before being reined back in by Ruth's steady guidance. Elena sat mostly in silence throughout the meeting, feeling like a spectator to a discussion that would ultimately determine the course of her entire future, yet having little voice in how that future would unfold. At one point, she caught Marissa's eyes across the table, and for just a moment, something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the smallest acknowledgement that neither of them had wanted this outcome, that they were both victims of circumstances beyond their control. It was not enough to heal the wound between them, but it was something, a small crack of light in an otherwise devastating situation. By the time the meeting finally concluded, no permanent solution had been reached. The council agreed to reconvene in a week's time, giving everyone involved space to process the situation, while continuing to explore possible paths forward for the alliance. Marissa left the hall without speaking to anyone, her family following close behind her, their expressions still tight with unresolved anger and hurt. Elena remained behind for a moment, unsure of what to do next, when Cale approached her quietly, his expression heavy with exhaustion. I am sorry you had to sit through all of that, he said. None of this is fair to you, being caught in the middle of a crisis you never asked for. None of it is fair to any of us, Elena said quietly, least of all Marissa. Cale nodded, his jaw tight. I know. I intend to make things right with her, as much as that is possible now. But Elena, I need you to know something. He paused, seeming to search for the right words. Whatever happens with the alliance, whatever the council decides, I cannot simply ignore what happened between us at the gathering. The bond is real, and I do not believe either of us can pretend otherwise, no matter how much easier that might make things for everyone else involved. Elena looked away, unable to meet his eyes, the weight of his words settling heavily in her chest. I don't know what you want me to say, Cale. I don't expect you to say anything, he said gently. I just needed you to know that I am not going to run from this, even though everything about the timing and the circumstances is a mess. We will figure this out together, one way or another. Elena left the estate that evening, with more questions than answers, the future stretching ahead of her, uncertain and frightening in ways she had never imagined possible just a few weeks earlier. She thought of her sister's devastated expression, of the years of trust now hanging by a thread between them, and she wondered if there was any path forward that could heal the damage already done, or if some wounds, once opened, simply had to be lived with for the rest of their lives. A week passed in a strange, uneasy quiet. Marissa remained distant from the family home, staying instead with her friend Charlotte near the eastern edge of the territory, sending only brief, formal messages to confirm she was well, but requesting that no one visit her yet. Elena respected the distance, though every day that passed without word from her sister felt like another small wound added to the growing collection between them. The council meeting that followed brought news that complicated matters even further. A messenger arrived at the Ashford estate midweek, delivering word from the Border Patrol that unusual activity had been spotted near the eastern edge of the territory, close to the lands controlled by the Draven Pack, a rival territory that had never fully accepted the peace treaty signed years earlier. Scouts reported unfamiliar wolves testing the boundary lines, a clear signal that someone was watching the Ashford territory closely, perhaps sensing an opportunity in the turmoil surrounding the broken engagement. Cale called an emergency meeting with his senior pack members, including Owen and several of the territory's most experienced trackers, to discuss the growing threat. The Draven Pack has wanted access to our northern hunting grounds for years, Owen explained, spreading a map across the table in Cale's study. They have been held back only by the strength of our alliance with the Voss territory and the unified front we presented as a result. If word spreads that the alliance is faltering, they may see this as their opportunity to test our defenses. How confident are you that this is connected to the broken engagement? Cale asked, studying the map carefully. The timing is difficult to ignore, one of the trackers said. Scouts have never approached this closely in the 3 years since the treaty was signed. Something has changed, and the most obvious change is the uncertainty surrounding your alliance with the Voss family. Cale rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him with renewed intensity. The personal crisis he had created was no longer simply a matter of hurt feelings and family tension. It now had the potential to threaten the safety and stability of his entire territory, putting every pack member under his protection at risk. We need to resolve the situation with the Voss family quickly, he said finally, not just for the sake of the alliance, but to remove any appearance of weakness that the Draven Pack might be looking to exploit. If they believe our territories are divided, they will act. We cannot allow that to happen. And how exactly do you propose resolving things quickly? Owen asked carefully, given that Marissa is still refusing to speak with anyone, and the fated bond between you and Elena remains unresolved. Cale did not have an immediate answer, but he knew time was no longer a luxury he could afford. He requested a private meeting with Marissa's father the following day, hoping to find some path forward that could satisfy the urgent need for a unified front, while still addressing the genuine hurt that had been caused. The meeting took place in a quiet study at the Voss family home, just the two men sitting across from each other, the weight of years of careful diplomacy hanging in the air between them. Marissa's father, a stern but fair man named Edward, listened carefully as Cale explained the reports from the Border Patrol, the growing concern among his senior pack members, and the urgent need to present a stable, unified front to any potential threats. You are asking me to rush my daughter's healing for the sake of political convenience, Edward said, his voice carrying a note of quiet anger. Do you understand how that sounds, Cale? I understand completely, Cale said, and I would never suggest rushing Marissa's healing for anything less than a genuine threat to the safety of both our territories. But the reports from the border are real, and I fear that any appearance of division between our families will only invite further testing from the Draven Pack, testing that could escalate into something far more dangerous if left unaddressed. Edward studied him for a long moment, weighing the sincerity of his words against the political reality of the situation. What exactly are you proposing? Cale took a deep breath before continuing. I propose that we move forward with formalizing the bond between myself and Elena, not as a replacement of the broken engagement, but as a new arrangement that still honors the spirit of the original alliance. Marissa would remain an honored member of both families, with no expectation placed upon her beyond what she herself chooses to offer, but a unified announcement showing that both our territories remain committed to peace and cooperation could go a long way toward discouraging any aggression from the Draven Pack. Edward was silent for a long moment, considering the proposal carefully. And what does Marissa think of this plan? I have not yet spoken with her about it, Cale admitted. I wanted to discuss the matter with you first, given everything your family has already endured because of my actions. But I intend to speak with her directly, to seek her input and her blessing, if she is willing to give it, before any formal announcement is made. Edward nodded slowly, though his expression remained guarded. My daughter has been through enough humiliation already, Cale. If you approach her about this, you do so with the utmost care and respect. She deserves that much, at the very least. She deserves far more than that, Cale said quietly, and I intend to make sure she knows it, regardless of what she decides. The conversation with Edward was only the first step in a difficult process that Cale knew would require patience and sensitivity in equal measure. He requested a meeting with Marissa directly, sending word through Charlotte that he wished to speak with her whenever she felt ready, with no pressure or expectation attached to the timeline. To his surprise, Marissa agreed to meet with him just 2 days later, choosing neutral ground, a quiet garden near the center of the territory that had always served as a peaceful meeting place for pack members needing to resolve disputes away from the pressures of formal council settings. She arrived looking more composed than she had at the council meeting, though the exhaustion in her eyes told Cale that the past 2 weeks had taken a significant toll on her. They sat together on a stone bench beneath a large oak tree, the silence between them heavy with everything that remained unspoken. "I have thought a great deal about what I want to say to you," Marissa began, before Cale could speak first. "And I find that my anger, while still present, has settled into something more complicated than I expected." "I owe you an apology that I know cannot possibly be enough," Cale said. "But I want you to know that I never intended to hurt you, Marissa. What happened at the gathering was not something either Elena or I chose or wanted. I have spent every day since then trying to understand how to move forward in a way that causes the least harm possible, though I fear I have already failed at that." Marissa was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the garden around them. "Can I tell you something honestly, Cale? Something I have not even fully admitted to myself until recently?" "Of course," he said. "I agreed to marry you because it was expected of me," Marissa said, her voice quiet but steady. "Our families arranged the match, and I convinced myself that respect and partnership were enough, that love, if it came at all, would grow naturally over time as we worked together. I never questioned it because questioning it felt selfish, given everything the alliance meant for both our territories." Cale listened carefully, sensing that she was building toward something important. "But watching what happened at the gathering," Marissa continued, "watching the way you looked at Elena, the way your entire being seemed to recognize something in her that it never recognized in me, despite months of engagement, it made me realize something uncomfortable. I was never truly excited about our marriage, Cale. I was excited about the responsibility, the purpose, the role I would play in securing our territory's future, but I never felt anything close to what I witnessed pass between you and my sister that night." Cale's chest tightened at her honesty. "Marissa, that does not make my actions any less painful for you." "No, it does not," she agreed. "The humiliation was real, and I will not pretend otherwise. Being publicly rejected in favor of my own sister, in front of the entire pack, is not something I will forget easily. But my anger has never truly been about losing you, Cale. It has been about the manner in which it happened, and about the fear that I had somehow failed, that something was wrong with me for not inspiring the kind of connection you clearly share with Elena." "There is nothing wrong with you," Cale said firmly. "You are strong, intelligent, and capable of leading this territory, alongside anyone fortunate enough to earn your genuine affection. What happened between Elena and me has nothing to do with any inadequacy on your part." Marissa managed a small, tired smile. "I am beginning to understand that, slowly. It has taken time, and I am not fully there yet, but I wanted you to know, before any further decisions are made about the alliance, that I do not wish to stand in the way of what is clearly meant to happen between you and my sister. I only ask that everyone involved, especially Elena, understand that I need time to heal, and that I will not be rushed into pretending everything is fine before I am truly ready." Cale felt a wave of relief, mixed with continued guilt, wash over him. "Thank you, Marissa, truly. And please know that whatever you need, however long you need, both Elena and I will respect that completely." Before he left the garden, Cale shared the growing concerns about the Draven Pack's border activity, explaining carefully the political pressures pushing toward a quicker resolution than any of them might otherwise have wanted. Marissa listened thoughtfully, understanding immediately the delicate balance between her own healing and the broader safety of both territories. "I will not pretend the timing does not frustrate me," she said finally. "But I understand the stakes involved. If a formal announcement can help discourage aggression from the Draven Pack, I will not stand in the way of it, provided it is handled with appropriate care and respect for everyone involved, including myself." Cale thanked her again before leaving the garden, feeling for the first time since the gathering that perhaps a path forward existed that would not require sacrificing every relationship in its wake. He returned to the estate that evening, and shared the conversation with Elena, who listened with tears in her eyes, relief, and continued guilt mixing together as she absorbed her sister's unexpected generosity. I need to thank her myself, and to make sure she truly knows how sorry I am for the pain all of this has caused her. She may not be ready for that conversation yet, Cale said gently, but I believe, in time, she will be. Elena nodded, holding on to that hope as tightly as she could, even as the looming threat from the Draven pack cast a long shadow over whatever fragile peace her family might be able to rebuild in the days ahead. 3 days passed before Marissa finally agreed to see Elena in person, sending a brief note asking her sister to meet her at their childhood home, rather than anywhere connected to the Ashford estate or the council. Elena arrived early, her nerves stretched thin as she waited in the small sitting room where the two of them had spent countless hours as children, playing games and sharing secrets, long before either of them had to worry about alliances or bonds, or the weight of pack responsibility. Marissa arrived a few minutes later, looking tired but calmer than Elena had seen her since the night of the gathering. The two sisters stood facing each other for a long moment, neither quite sure how to begin a conversation that carried so much unspoken pain between them. "I don't know where to start," Elena finally said, her voice trembling slightly. "I have rehearsed 100 different things to say to you, and none of them feel like enough." "Then don't try to make a speech," Marissa said, settling into the worn armchair near the window, the same chair she had always claimed as hers since childhood. "Just talk to me the way you always have." Elena sat down across from her, taking a steadying breath. "I am so sorry, Marissa. For all of it. For not telling you the moment I felt something strange at the feast. For not finding a way to warn you before things reached the point they did. I told myself I was protecting your happiness by staying silent, but I think, if I am honest with myself, I was also protecting my own fear of what admitting the feeling out loud might mean." Marissa was quiet for a moment, studying her sister's face carefully. "I appreciate you saying that. And I believe you, that you never intended any of this to happen the way it did. But Elena, I need you to understand something important. My anger was never really about you stealing something from me. Cale and I discussed this, and I told him something I had not fully admitted even to myself until recently. I was never truly in love with him, not in the way a fated bond describes. I agreed to the marriage because it felt like the responsible thing to do, the expected thing, given our family's history, and the alliance it would secure. That does not make what happened hurt any less," Elena said quietly. "No, it doesn't," Marissa agreed, "but it changes how I understand my own anger. I was humiliated, watching something happen in front of the entire pack that revealed I had never truly experienced the kind of connection Cale clearly shares with you. That hurt is real, and it will take time to fully heal. But I do not blame you for feeling something you never asked to feel, Elena. None of us control who our wolves recognize as a mate." Elena felt tears welling in her eyes, relief and lingering guilt tangling together in her chest. "I have missed you so much these past 2 weeks. I know that probably sounds strange, given everything that has happened, but the distance between us has felt like its own kind of grief." Marissa reached across the small space between their chairs and took Elena's hand, the first physical gesture of comfort she had offered since the night of the gathering. "I have missed you too. Being apart from you has made me realize how much I have always relied on having you nearby, even when I did not always show my appreciation for it as clearly as I should have." The two sisters sat together for a long while after that, talking through the events of the past weeks with a growing sense of understanding between them. Marissa spoke honestly about the doubts she had carried for months about the marriage, doubts she had never voiced to anyone because she feared disappointing their families or jeopardizing the alliance both territories depended on. Elena listened, grateful for her sister's honesty, and shared her own fears about what the future now held, the uncertainty of stepping into a role she had never sought or expected. "What happens now, with the alliance?" Elena asked eventually. Cale mentioned the possibility of a formal announcement, given the concerns about the Draven Pack's activity along the border. Marissa's expression grew more serious at the mention of the border. "Father told me about the scouts. It concerns me more than I initially let on when Cale and I spoke. The Draven Pack has always been patient, calculating. If they are testing our borders now, it means they believe there is a genuine opportunity, and that is not something any of us can afford to underestimate." "I don't want to rush anything that would cause you more pain," Elena said carefully. but I also understand the stakes involved if the alliance appears weakened. I already told Kale I would not stand in the way of a formal announcement, provided it is handled with care, Marissa said. And I meant that. Our territories cannot afford instability right now, not with a genuine threat testing our defenses. I would rather see you and Kale formally bonded, with my support clearly visible to everyone watching, than risk giving the Draven Pack any opening to exploit our family's private struggles. Elena studied her sister carefully, still amazed by the strength and generosity Marissa was offering, despite everything she had endured. Are you certain? I do not want you to feel pressured into supporting something before you are truly ready. I am certain, Marissa said firmly. Not because I have fully healed from everything that happened, because I have not yet, but because I understand what is at stake, and because despite the pain, I have not stopped loving you as my sister, Elena. I do not intend to let a bond neither of us chose destroy the relationship we have shared our entire lives. The two sisters embraced for a long moment, the first genuine embrace they had shared since before the gathering, and Elena felt something in her chest ease slightly, for the first time in weeks, a small but meaningful step toward healing the fracture that had formed between them. Their reconciliation, however fragile and still healing, arrived just in time. 2 days later, word reached the Ashford estate that a small group of Draven scouts had crossed directly into Ashford territory under the cover of darkness, testing the response time of the border patrol before retreating back across the boundary line. No violence had occurred, but the message was unmistakable. The Draven Pack was watching closely, waiting for any sign of weakness they could exploit. Kale called an emergency meeting with Owen, the senior trackers, and Elena's father, laying out the reports from the border patrol with growing urgency. This is no longer a matter of speculation, he said, spreading a detailed map across the table, showing the points where the scouts had crossed. They are actively probing our defenses, and if they sense any further instability, I fear this will escalate quickly. How quickly can the formal announcement be arranged? Edward asked, his own concern evident in the tightness of his voice. Within the week, if everyone involved agrees, Kale said. Marissa has already given her blessing, provided it is handled with appropriate care. I intend to speak with Elena today to finalize the details, and we can move forward with a public ceremony that demonstrates clearly to the Draven Pack, and to any others watching, that our alliance remains strong despite the unexpected turn of events. Owen leaned forward, studying the map carefully. We should also increase patrols along the eastern border immediately, regardless of the timeline for the announcement. If the Draven Pack believes we are distracted by internal matters, that alone could invite further testing of our defenses. Agreed, Kale said. Double the patrols starting tonight. I want eyes on every inch of that border, until we are certain the situation has stabilized. The meeting continued late into the evening, plans forming for both the increased security measures and the formal ceremony that would announce the bond between Kale and Elena to the wider Pack community, and, by extension, to any watching neighbors who might be considering testing the strength of the Ashford alliance. Elena, informed of the developments later that night, felt a mixture of relief and renewed anxiety settle over her. The path forward finally felt clear, a way to honor the unexpected bond fate had created, while preserving the safety and stability of both territories. But as she lay awake that night, staring at the mark on her wrist that had started this entire chain of events, she could not shake the feeling that the true test of everything, her bond with Kale, her relationship with Marissa, and the safety of everyone she loved, was still waiting for them somewhere on the horizon, growing closer with each passing day. The preparations for the formal announcement moved quickly, but not without their own share of complications. Elena found herself once again at the center of planning she had never expected to lead, this time not for her sister's wedding, but for a ceremony that would formally recognize the bond between herself and Kale in front of the entire pack and any visiting representatives from allied territories. Grace, ever steady and reliable, took charge of the practical details, while Elena focused on something far more difficult, learning what it truly meant to step into the role of an alpha's mate. She spent hours with Ruth, the elder council member, learning about the responsibilities that would soon fall to her, the expectations of the pack, and the delicate diplomacy required to maintain peace with neighboring territories during such an uncertain time. You seem overwhelmed, Ruth observed one afternoon, as Elena struggled to memorize the names and territorial boundaries of the pack's various allies and rivals. I never wanted this kind of responsibility, Elena admitted, setting down the map she had been studying. I spent my whole life comfortable staying in the background, letting Marissa take the lead in anything that required attention or leadership. I don't know if I am capable of what this role demands. Ruth studied her for a long moment before responding. Capability is not always something you are born with, Elena. Sometimes it is something you grow into, through necessity and through the support of those around you. Cale did not become the alpha he is today, without facing his own doubts and fears when the responsibility first fell to him after his father's passing. You will find your own strength in time, provided you allow yourself the patience to grow into it. Elena appreciated the reassurance, though the doubt lingered in the back of her mind, especially during moments when she caught herself comparing her own quiet, careful nature to Marissa's natural confidence and command. She wondered, not for the first time, if the moon had made a mistake, choosing her instead of the sister who had always seemed so much better suited to standing beside an alpha. Cale, sensing her uncertainty during one of their evening meetings to discuss ceremony details, addressed the concern directly. You keep comparing yourself to Marissa, he said gently, as they sat together in the estate's garden, going over the guest list for the announcement. I can see it in your expression whenever the topic of leadership comes up. It's hard not to, Elena admitted. She has always seemed so naturally suited to this kind of role, confident and commanding, in a way that I have never been. Confidence is not the only quality that makes a good partner in leadership, Cale said. Your thoughtfulness, your careful attention to the needs of others, your willingness to listen before speaking, these are qualities that matter just as much, sometimes even more, than natural confidence. My wolf did not choose you by accident, Elena. It recognized something in you that complements the parts of myself I struggle with most, the tendency to act quickly without always considering every consequence, the impatience that sometimes clouds my judgment during difficult counsel decisions. Elena felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words, though the doubt did not disappear entirely. I hope you're right. I hope, in time, I can become someone this pack can trust to help lead them, especially with the growing tension along the border. You already have my trust, Cale said quietly. The rest will follow, given time and patience. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a messenger, breathless from running across the estate grounds, carrying urgent news that immediately shattered the calm atmosphere of the garden. Alpha, there has been an incident at the eastern border. A group of Draven wolves crossed into our territory an hour ago, further than any previous incursion. Our patrol engaged them directly. Cale stood immediately, his entire demeanor shifting into the sharp, focused leader Elena had witnessed only in glimpses during their time together. Casualties? Minor injuries on both sides, the messenger reported. No fatalities, but the confrontation was more aggressive than any previous testing of the border. Owen is already at the scene, coordinating the response. I need to go, Cale said, turning to Elena, his expression tight with concern. This confirms what we feared. The Draven pack is growing bolder, and I fear the timeline for the formal announcement may need to be accelerated even further. Go, Elena said, standing as well. I will finish reviewing the ceremony details with Grace. Whatever you need from me, I am ready to help however I can. Cale left immediately, accompanied by several senior pack members, heading toward the eastern border to assess the situation firsthand. Elena remained behind, her heart pounding with worry, though she forced herself to focus on the tasks in front of her, trusting that Cale and his experienced trackers would handle the immediate crisis, while she continued preparing for the ceremony that everyone hoped would help stabilize the situation. News trickled in slowly over the following hours. The confrontation at the border had been more serious than initially reported, with several pack members sustaining injuries that required careful attention from the territory's healers. The Draven scouts had retreated once Owen and the reinforcements arrived, but the message was clear. The rival pack was no longer content with quiet testing of the boundary lines. They were actively probing for weaknesses, likely encouraged by rumors of the broken engagement and the uncertainty surrounding the alliance. Cale returned late that evening, exhaustion evident in every line of his face, though his eyes carried a fierce determination that told Elena he had already begun formulating a response to the growing threat. He found her still awake, working alongside Grace on final preparations for the ceremony despite the late hour. How are the injured pack members? Elena asked immediately, setting aside the papers she had been reviewing. They will recover, Cale said, sitting down heavily beside her. But this cannot continue. The Draven pack grows bolder with each passing day, and I fear the ceremony alone may not be enough to discourage them now. What do you propose? Elena asked. I have called for a full council meeting tomorrow morning, Cale said. We need to discuss not just the ceremony, but a broader strategy for securing our borders, and, if necessary, sending a clear message to the Draven pack that any further aggression will be met with decisive resistance. Elena felt a chill run through her at the implication in his words, the possibility that the growing tension might escalate beyond border skirmishes into something far more serious. She reached out and took his hand, the mark on her wrist warming slightly at the contact, a physical reminder of the bond that now connected them through whatever challenges lay ahead. Whatever happens, she said quietly, we will face it together. Cale looked at her, something softening in his exhausted expression, despite the weight of the crisis pressing down on them both. I know we will. And Elena, I want you to know, despite everything that has happened, despite the pain this bond has caused for Marissa and for everyone affected by the broken engagement, I have never once regretted the connection between us. I only regret the circumstances that brought it into existence in such a painful way. I feel the same, Elena admitted, surprising herself with how easily the words came now, after weeks of trying to deny or bury the feeling entirely. I think, somewhere along the way, I stopped fighting the bond and started simply accepting that it is a part of who I am now, whether I fully understand why or not. They sat together quietly for a long while after that, the weight of the coming days settling around them, but the closeness between them offering a small measure of comfort against the uncertainty that lay ahead. The formal announcement would proceed as planned, but now it would carry an additional weight, a clear signal to the Draven pack, and to any others watching, that the Ashford territory remained united and prepared to defend itself, regardless of the personal turmoil that had briefly threatened to divide it. Elena did not sleep easily that night, her mind circling through everything that had happened over the past weeks, and everything still to come. But for the first time since the gathering, she found herself facing the future not with dread, but with a quiet, determined resolve to embrace whatever role fate had chosen for her, and to help protect the people and the territory that had somehow, against all odds, become her own to defend. The council meeting the following morning was tense from the moment it began, every senior pack member present understanding the gravity of the decisions that needed to be made. Cale stood at the head of the table, maps spread out before him showing the eastern border and the territory beyond it controlled by the Draven pack, while Owen and the senior trackers presented detailed reports on the recent incursions. They are testing us in increasingly aggressive ways, Owen explained, pointing to several marked locations along the border. What began as distant scouting has now escalated into direct confrontation. If we do not respond decisively, I fear they will continue pushing further into our territory, believing us too distracted or divided to mount an effective defense. What response do you recommend? Cale asked, though from his expression, Elena could tell he had already begun formulating his own thoughts on the matter. A show of strength, Owen said, not an attack, but a clear demonstration that our territory remains united and prepared. The formal announcement of the bond between you and Elena should proceed immediately, with representatives from allied territories invited to witness it. At the same time, I recommend a visible increase in patrol presence along the entire eastern border, enough to make clear that any further incursion will be met with serious resistance. The council debated the specifics for over an hour, weighing various strategies and their potential consequences. Elena listened carefully throughout the discussion, grateful that her recent studies with Ruth had at least given her enough understanding of pack politics to follow the conversation, even if she did not yet feel confident enough to contribute directly to such high-stakes decisions. Eventually, a plan emerged. The formal announcement ceremony would take place in 5 days, accelerated from the original timeline, with invitations sent immediately to allied territories, including a formal notice to the Draven pack itself, a clear signal that the Ashford territory intended to proceed with confidence, despite the recent turmoil. Simultaneously, patrols along the border would be doubled again, with Owen personally overseeing the increased security measures. There is one more matter we must address, Ruth said, once the primary strategy had been agreed upon. Marissa's role in the ceremony. Her presence and visible support will carry significant weight in demonstrating the strength and unity of both families involved in the original alliance. All eyes turned toward Elena, who felt a flush of discomfort at being asked to speak on her sister's behalf. "I will speak with her directly," she said. "I believe she has already indicated her willingness to support the ceremony, but I want to make certain she is fully comfortable with whatever role is asked of her, given everything she has already endured." The council agreed, and the meeting concluded with a clear sense of purpose that had been notably absent in the days following the initial crisis at the gathering. Elena left the estate immediately afterward, making her way to Marissa's temporary residence at Charlotte's home, determined to have an honest conversation about what the ceremony would require of her sister. She found Marissa in the garden, looking healthier and more settled than she had in weeks, a small but genuine smile appearing on her face as Elena approached. "I heard about the incident at the border yesterday," Marissa said. Before Elena could even explain the purpose of her visit, "Father told me the council was meeting this morning to discuss a response. The announcement ceremony has been moved up," Elena explained, sitting down beside her sister. "5 days from now, the council believes a clear demonstration of unity will help discourage further aggression from the Draven Pack. But they also asked about your role in the ceremony, and I wanted to speak with you directly, before agreeing to anything on your behalf." Marissa considered the request thoughtfully. "What exactly would be asked of me?" "A visible presence at the ceremony," Elena said carefully, "standing alongside our family, showing support for the bond and for the continued alliance between our territories. I told the council I would not agree to anything without speaking with you first, and if you are not ready for that level of public visibility, I will find another way to explain your absence that does not compromise the message of unity we need to send." Marissa was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the garden around her. "I have thought a great deal about this over the past few days, actually, even before you arrived with this news. I think I am ready, Elena. Not because I have fully healed, because as I said before, that will take more time. But because I understand what is at stake, and because I have realized something important during my time away from everyone." "What is that?" Elena asked gently. "I realized that hiding away, refusing to engage with the family and the pack, was not helping me heal. It was only prolonging my own pain, keeping me isolated with my hurt, instead of allowing myself to move forward. I think standing beside you and Kale at the ceremony, showing everyone, including myself, that I can face this situation with grace and strength, might actually help me find the closure I need." Elena reached out and squeezed her sister's hand, gratitude and relief washing over her in equal measure. "Thank you, Marissa, truly. I know this is not easy, and I promise you, whatever role you choose to play, big or small, I will always be grateful for the strength you have shown throughout all of this." The two sisters spent the rest of the afternoon together, discussing the details of the ceremony, and slowly rebuilding the closeness that had always defined their relationship before the events of the full moon gathering had temporarily shattered it. By the time Elena left to return to the estate, she felt a sense of hope she had not experienced in weeks, a belief that perhaps her family, however unconventional their circumstances had become, could find a path forward that honored everyone's needs and feelings. The following days passed in a blur of preparation. Invitations were sent to allied territories, formal notice delivered to the Draven Pack through official channels, and the entire Ashford estate transformed itself once again into a hub of ceremonial activity, this time with an added undercurrent of tension, given the doubled patrols along the border and the ever-present awareness that this ceremony carried far greater stakes than simply celebrating a bond between two people. Elena found herself increasingly at Kale's side during this period, not just for ceremony preparations, but for briefings on the border situation, council discussions on territorial defense, and quiet moments where they simply supported each other through the mounting pressure of everything unfolding around them. She began to understand, more clearly with each passing day, what Ruth had meant about growing into a role rather than being born ready for it. The uncertainty never fully disappeared, but her confidence in handling it steadily increased. 2 days before the ceremony, Owen arrived at the estate with urgent news that immediately darkened the cautiously hopeful atmosphere that had been building. "The Draven Pack has begun massing wolves near the border," he reported, finding Kale and Elena together in the study, reviewing final ceremony details. "Not the small scouting groups we have seen previously. This looks like genuine preparation for a larger confrontation." Kale's expression hardened immediately. How many? Our trackers estimate at least 3 times the size of any group we have encountered so far, Owen said grimly. If this is preparation for an actual assault rather than continued testing, we need to be ready to respond immediately. The ceremony is in 2 days, Kale said, thinking quickly. Do we delay it, given this development? I would advise against delaying, Owen said, after a moment of consideration. If the Draven Pack sees us postponing our plans in response to their show of force, it may embolden them further, confirming their belief that we are vulnerable. Proceeding as planned, while simultaneously preparing our defenses fully, sends a stronger message of confidence and resolve. Elena felt her stomach tighten with anxiety at the implications of what Owen was describing. The very real possibility that the ceremony meant to secure peace might instead become the backdrop for the exact conflict everyone had been working so desperately to avoid. She looked at Kale, searching his expression for reassurance, though she could see the same concern reflected in his eyes. We proceed as planned, Kale said finally, his voice carrying the steady authority of leadership, even as the weight of the decision clearly pressed on him. But we prepare for the worst possibility as well. Owen, I want every available fighter positioned strategically around the ceremony grounds, visible enough to demonstrate our readiness, but not so overt that it disrupts the ceremony itself. If the Draven Pack intends to use this moment as an opportunity to strike, they will find us far better prepared than they anticipate. Owen nodded and left immediately to begin coordinating the defensive preparations, leaving Kale and Elena alone in the study, the earlier hopeful atmosphere of ceremony planning now replaced with a tense awareness of the very real danger looming just beyond the territory's borders. Are you frightened? Kale asked quietly, watching Elena's expression carefully. Terrified, she admitted honestly. Not just for myself, but for everyone. For you, for Marissa, for the entire pack that will be gathered together in one place, if the Draven Pack truly intends to attack. Kale reached out and took her hand, the mark on her wrist glowing faintly at the contact, a physical reminder of the bond that had brought them to this moment, for better or worse. Whatever happens in 2 days, I promise you, we will face it together, and we will protect this pack with everything we have. The bond between us is not just a personal connection, Elena. I believe now, more than ever, that fate brought us together for a reason far greater than either of us initially understood, and perhaps that reason is becoming clearer with each passing day. Elena held onto his words as tightly as she could over the following 2 days, drawing strength from them even as the preparations around the estate took on an increasingly serious tone, patrols intensifying, weapons and defensive strategies discussed in hushed tones among the senior pack members, and the entire territory bracing itself for whatever the day of the ceremony might ultimately bring. The morning of the ceremony arrived clear and bright, the kind of beautiful day that felt almost cruel, given the tension simmering beneath the surface of every careful preparation. The clearing beyond the Ashford estate, the same clearing where the fateful marking had taken place weeks earlier, had been transformed once again, this time decorated with ribbons and flowers, in preparation for a ceremony meant to symbolize unity and strength. Elena stood in a private chamber within the estate, dressed in a deep blue gown that Grace had helped select, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to steady her nerves before the ceremony began. Marissa arrived to help with the final preparations, looking radiant despite everything her family had endured, her presence a comforting reminder of how far they had come since the painful days following the gathering. You look beautiful, Marissa said, adjusting a small ornament in Elena's carefully arranged hair. Nervous? Terrified, Elena admitted, not just about the ceremony itself, but about everything Owen reported regarding the Draven Pack's movements. Marissa's expression grew serious. Father told me about the increased patrols. Do you truly believe they might attack today, during the ceremony itself? I don't know, Elena said honestly, but Kale and Owen have prepared as thoroughly as possible. Whatever happens, I trust that this pack will protect itself. Marissa squeezed her sister's hand reassuringly. And I will be right there beside you, no matter what happens today. We face this together, as a family. Word arrived just as the ceremony was set to begin, that guests from several allied territories had arrived and were gathering in the clearing, along with the entire Ashford pack and numerous members of the Voss family's own community. Elena took a deep breath, steadying herself as best she could, before making her way toward the clearing alongside her family, ready to face whatever the day held in store. The ceremony began with the same solemn dignity that marked all significant pack gatherings, elders offering words of blessing, allied representatives extending formal greetings, and well wishes for the bond being celebrated. Kale stood at the center of the clearing, dressed in formal attire that marked his position as alpha, his eyes finding Elena's the moment she stepped into view, a quiet reassurance passing between them despite the underlying tension both of them carried. Elena moved to stand beside him, Marissa taking her place close by, visibly supporting her sister exactly as she had promised. The gathered crowd watched with a mixture of curiosity and genuine warmth, as Ruth began the formal words that would recognize the bond between Kale and Elena in front of the entire pack community. The ceremony proceeded smoothly through its early stages, and for a brief, hopeful moment, Elena allowed herself to believe that perhaps the feared confrontation would not materialize after all, that the show of unity and strength might be enough to discourage any aggression from the watching Draven pack. That hope shattered abruptly when a sharp horn blast echoed from the eastern edge of the territory, the unmistakable signal used by border patrols to alert the pack of an incoming threat. The gathered crowd fell into immediate, tense silence, every head turning toward the sound. "They're here," Owen said grimly, appearing at Kale's side within moments, having clearly been monitoring the border situation, even during the ceremony itself. A significant force has crossed the boundary line, moving directly toward this location. Kale's expression shifted instantly from ceremonial dignity to the sharp, decisive focus of a leader facing genuine crisis. "How much time do we have?" "Minutes, not hours," Owen said. They must have been waiting for the perfect moment to strike, knowing the entire pack would be gathered in one place. The crowd began to stir with fear and confusion, and Kale raised his voice, projecting the calm authority that had earned him the loyalty of his entire pack. "Everyone, remain calm. Our defenses have anticipated this possibility, and every fighter present is prepared to protect this territory, and everyone gathered here today. Non-combatants, please move immediately toward the estate for shelter, following the paths our guards will direct you to." The ceremony guests began moving quickly but calmly toward the safety of the estate, while pack fighters who had been strategically positioned throughout the clearing, disguised among the ceremonial guests, began revealing themselves and taking up defensive positions along the perimeter of the gathering space. Elena felt her heart pounding as she watched the transformation unfold around her. Ordinary ceremony attendees suddenly becoming a coordinated defensive force. "Elena, you need to go with the others," Kale said urgently, turning to her as the chaos organized itself into purposeful movement. "I'm not leaving you," Elena said firmly, surprising herself with the steadiness of her own voice, despite the fear coursing through her. "I may not be a trained fighter, but I refuse to hide, while everyone I care about faces this threat." "This is not the time to argue," Kale said, though something in his expression softened slightly at her determination. "Then don't argue," Elena said. "Let me help however I can. I can assist with coordinating the evacuation, tending to any injuries, anything that keeps me useful, without putting myself directly in the path of danger unnecessarily." Marissa appeared beside them, having overheard the exchange. "I will stay with her," she said firmly. "We can help manage the wounded and support the evacuation efforts from a safer position near the estate's medical hall. That way, we remain useful without adding to the immediate danger facing the frontline fighters." Kale nodded, recognizing there was no time to argue further. "Stay close to the estate, both of you. Owen will position guards near the medical hall to ensure your safety." The horn sounded again, closer this time, and within moments, the first wave of Draven wolves broke through the tree line at the edge of the clearing, their intentions unmistakable. Kale's expression hardened into fierce determination as he turned to face the incoming threat, his own wolf clearly straining beneath the surface, ready to be released in defense of his pack and territory. "Ashford pack, hold the line." Kale's voice boomed across the clearing, carrying an authority that steadied the nerves of every fighter present. "We defend our home, our families, and everyone who has trusted us with their safety today." The confrontation that followed was intense and chaotic, though the Ashford pack's careful preparation proved its worth almost immediately. Owen coordinated the defensive lines with practiced precision, fighters moving in coordinated formations that had clearly been drilled extensively in anticipation of exactly this kind of threat. Elena watched from a safer distance near the medical hall, her heart in her throat, as she caught glimpses of the confrontation unfolding at the clearing's edge, the flashes of movement, and the sounds of a fierce but controlled defense holding firm against the invading force. Something remarkable happened as the confrontation intensified, something Elena felt rather than saw at first, a strange warmth spreading from the mark on her wrist, growing steadily stronger as she watched Kale fighting at the front of his pack's defensive line. She realized, with startling clarity, that she could sense his determination, his focus, even a measure of his physical strength, as if the bond between them was somehow lending him additional resolve during the confrontation. Marissa noticed the change in her sister's expression. "What is it, Elena? Are you all right?" "I can feel him," Elena said, her voice filled with wonder, despite the danger surrounding them. "Through the bond, I can feel his strength, his determination. I think, somehow, it is helping him." The battle continued, for what felt like an eternity, but was in reality closer to 20 intense minutes. The Ashford pack's superior preparation and coordinated defense, gradually overwhelming the Draven force's initial advantage of surprise. Kale fought with a ferocity and clarity that Owen would later describe as unlike anything he had witnessed before, his movements sharp and decisive, his strategic decisions in the heat of battle proving remarkably effective at containing and eventually repelling the invading wolves. As the tide of the confrontation shifted decisively in the Ashford pack's favor, the remaining Draven fighters began a hasty retreat, recognizing that their surprise attack had failed to achieve the decisive advantage they had clearly hoped for. Kale led a measured pursuit to the border, ensuring the retreating force was fully driven from Ashford territory, before calling his fighters back to assess the aftermath of the confrontation. Elena rushed forward the moment the immediate danger had passed, her relief nearly overwhelming as she found Kale standing near the edge of the clearing, breathing heavily but relatively unharmed, a few minor injuries visible but nothing that appeared serious. "You're all right," she said, relief flooding through her as she reached him, checking carefully for any injuries that might need immediate attention. "I'm all right," Kale confirmed, pulling her into a brief but fierce embrace, the exhaustion and adrenaline of the battle still evident in every line of his body. "The bond, Elena. I felt it during the fight. A strength I have never experienced before, as if you were somehow lending me your own resolve." "I felt it too," Elena said. "I could sense your determination, even from a distance. I think, perhaps, this is part of what a fated bond truly means. A connection that goes beyond simple emotion. Something that strengthens both of us when we need it most." As the pack began assessing the aftermath, treating the wounded, and confirming that the Draven threat had been fully repelled, Marissa approached, relief evident on her own face, as she took in the scene before her. "The territory held," she said. "Despite everything, despite the interrupted ceremony, we protected our home." Kale looked around at the clearing, at the exhausted but determined faces of his pack members, at Elena, standing steadily beside him despite everything the day had thrown at them, and at Marissa, whose support throughout the entire ordeal had proven invaluable to the family's resilience. "We protected our home because we faced this threat together, as a united family and pack. That unity, more than any single fighter's strength, is what ultimately turned back the Draven pack's ambitions today." The ceremony would need to be completed once the immediate crisis had fully passed, but in that moment, standing amid the aftermath of a battle successfully defended, Elena understood with absolute clarity that whatever challenges still lay ahead, she, Kale, and Marissa had already proven, through the events of this single extraordinary day, that they possessed the strength and unity necessary to face them. In the days that followed the battle, the Ashford territory buzzed with a mixture of relief and renewed determination. Word of the successful defense spread quickly to allied territories, and messages of support and admiration arrived from pack leaders who had witnessed firsthand the strength and unity displayed during the confrontation. The Draven pack, having suffered a clear and decisive setback, sent no further scouts or aggressive incursions along the border in the weeks that followed, their earlier ambitions apparently reconsidered in light of the Ashford territory's demonstrated strength. The formal ceremony, interrupted so dramatically on the day of the attack, was rescheduled for 2 weeks later, once the immediate concerns about security had settled and the wounded pack members had sufficiently recovered. This time, when the day arrived, There was no lingering uncertainty about whether the Draven pack might strike again. Instead, the entire territory approached the rescheduled ceremony with a sense of hard-won confidence, a community that had faced genuine danger together and emerged stronger for it. Elena stood once again in the same clearing, wearing the same deep blue gown, though this time, the nervous trembling that had marked her hands weeks earlier had been replaced by a steady, quiet confidence. She had spent the intervening weeks continuing her studies with Ruth, working alongside Kale on council matters, and slowly but surely growing into the role that fate had chosen for her, exactly as Ruth had promised she would. Marissa stood beside her once again, her presence no longer carrying the complicated weight of forced obligation, but instead reflecting a genuine, hard-earned peace with the path her life had taken. In the weeks following the battle, she had begun spending increasing amounts of time with Owen, who had shown remarkable patience and gentleness in supporting her through her healing process, and Elena suspected, watching the way her sister's eyes brightened whenever Owen was nearby, that a new and entirely different kind of connection might be quietly forming between them. The ceremony proceeded this time without interruption, Ruth's solemn words echoing across the clearing, as she formally recognized the bond between Kale and Elena in front of the assembled pack and allied representatives who had traveled to witness the occasion. When Kale took Elena's hand before the entire gathered crowd, the mark on her wrist glowing warmly in response to his touch, she felt none of the fear or uncertainty that had haunted her in the weeks following the initial marking at the previous gathering. Instead, she felt only a quiet, steady certainty that she had found exactly where she belonged. "Elena Voss," Kale said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent clearing. "From the moment my wolf recognized you, I fought against what fate had chosen, fearing the pain it might cause to those I cared about. But I have learned, through everything we have faced together, that fate rarely chooses paths that are simple or easy. It chooses paths that reveal our true strength, and I have found more strength standing beside you than I ever imagined possible." Elena felt tears of genuine happiness gathering in her eyes as she responded, her voice steady despite the emotion behind her words. "I never sought this bond, and for weeks, I feared it more than anything I had ever faced. But I have come to understand that fate saw something in the connection between us that neither of us initially recognized, a strength that helped protect this entire territory when it mattered most. I am honored to stand beside you, not just as your bonded mate, but as your partner in leading and protecting the pack we both love." The crowd erupted into genuine celebration as the ceremony concluded, the earlier tension of the interrupted attempt replaced entirely by joyful recognition of everything the community had overcome together. Elena's parents stood proudly among the crowd, their earlier concerns about the alliance's stability long since resolved by the demonstrated strength and unity of the past several weeks. Edward, who had initially been so resistant to the idea of the broken engagement being resolved through Elena's bond with Kale, now watched the ceremony with visible pride, having come to fully appreciate the genuine connection between his younger daughter and the alpha who had once been intended for his elder daughter instead. As the celebration continued late into the evening, Elena found a quiet moment to step away with Marissa, the two sisters finding a peaceful spot near the edge of the clearing, away from the noise and festivity of the gathered crowd. "I never imagined, when all of this began, that we would end up here," Elena said, watching the celebration continue in the distance, standing together, at peace with everything that happened, rather than torn apart by it. "Neither did I," Marissa admitted, a genuine smile lighting her face. "But I think, looking back, that everything happened exactly as it needed to. Painful as it was in the moment, I found a strength in myself I never knew existed, and perhaps, though I am still cautious about admitting it fully, I have found the beginning of something entirely unexpected with Owen." Elena laughed softly, delighted by the admission. "I have noticed the way he looks at you. I am happy for you, Marissa, genuinely happy. In a way I was not sure I would ever feel again after everything that happened between us. We found our way back to each other," Marissa said, squeezing her sister's hand affectionately. "That matters more than any of the pain we had to endure to get here. You are my sister, Elena, and nothing, not fate, not a broken engagement, not even a battle fought at our own wedding ceremony, could ever change that bond between us." The two sisters embraced warmly, the earlier fracture between them fully healed, replaced by an even deeper appreciation for the resilience of their relationship. As they returned to the celebration together, Kale found Elena once more, pulling her gently into the festivities, where pack members and allied guests alike offered their congratulations and well wishes for the future of the newly recognized bond and the territory it represented. Later that night, as the celebration finally began to wind down, and the stars stretched brilliant and clear above the clearing, Kale and Elena stood together near the edge of the gathering, looking out at the peaceful territory that had, against all odds and expectations, found its way to a stronger, more unified future than anyone could have predicted when the strange pull between them had first stirred at a betrothal feast weeks earlier. "Do you regret any of it?" Kale asked quietly, watching the last of the celebrating pack members make their way home under the moonlight. "The pain it caused, the uncertainty, the danger we faced together?" Elena considered the question carefully before answering, thinking of everything they had endured, the fear, the guilt, the battle that had nearly overshadowed their bond entirely. "I regret the pain Marissa had to endure," she said finally. "That will always weigh on me, no matter how completely we have healed from it. But the bond itself, and everything it revealed about my own strength, about the depth of my sister's resilience, and about the connection between us that helped protect this entire territory when we needed it most. No, I do not regret any of that. I believe, in the end, fate knew exactly what it was doing, even when none of us could see the path clearly." Kale pulled her close, the mark on her wrist glowing softly beneath the moonlight, a permanent symbol of a bond that had begun in chaos and confusion, but had ultimately grown into something strong enough to protect an entire community and heal wounds that once seemed impossible to mend. Above them, the moon continued its steady journey across the night sky, silent witness to everything that had unfolded beneath its light, from the moment of the fateful marking to this final, peaceful celebration of a bond that had, against every expectation, brought healing, strength, and unity to everyone it had touched. The territory settled into a well-earned peace in the weeks and months that followed, the Draven Pack's ambitions thoroughly discouraged by the demonstrated strength of the Ashford Alliance, and the Voss family finding a new, deeper unity forged through the trials they had faced together. Marissa's growing connection with Owen blossomed steadily over time, bringing its own quiet joy to a family that had feared, in the darkest days following the broken engagement, that they might never fully recover the closeness they had once shared. Elena, once content to remain quietly in her sister's shadow, found herself growing steadily into a role she had never sought, but had come to embrace fully, standing beside Kale as a true partner in leading and protecting the territory that had become her home. And though the path that led her there had been marked by unexpected pain and unimaginable challenges, she understood, looking back on everything that had happened, that some bonds, however they begin, are simply meant to be, guiding those they connect toward a strength and a future neither could have found alone.